Welcome back to the Comstock channel. My name is Brian Hendrickson. Today I have Ron Rabou with us today. Welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to part one of a two-part episode. Thanks for being on. So let's kind of dive in straight off. Talk about yourself and all the many hats that you wear.
Well, I guess I'll just introduce myself basically. So we've got a little bit of a background here. I live in southeastern Wyoming. I'm actually originally from southeastern Wyoming. So for those people that have never been here, we have about 500 and some thousand people that live on 97,000 square miles. So it's pretty sparsely populated. The largest town in the state of Wyoming is Cheyenne. That's about 60,000 people. And then it drops off pretty sharply from there. So very rural state. And I actually grew up I'm a fifth generation on a cattle ranch out here in southeastern Wyoming. And my great-great-grandparents homesteaded out here in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And my great-grandfather started up a cattle ranch, was really into quarter horses, really into cattle. And so that's the environment that I was raised in. You know, we had my parents and my sister and I, and then my grandparents. And on the other side of the family were my dad's cousins and their families as well. And so I just kind of grew up on horseback and grew up backgrounding calves and running a cow-calf operation. Had a lot of experience primarily in the FFA program, and was very, very active in the state FFA program and the national FFA program. And that's kind of how I grew up. I guess for me as a production agriculturalist, my dad didn't necessarily tell me that one day you're going to be at the ranch. Although I think that when you're a fifth generation, right, that it's kind of like this unspoken expectation, right? That yeah, you can go get an education and you can do what you want to do, but there's this place and someone's going to have to take it over someday. And, part of the dilemma with that, quite frankly, was that I really liked speaking. I really liked working with people. And when you live in Wyoming, that's, as I described, so sparsely populated, it doesn't lend to that opportunity very well. And so I just really kind of wanted to just explore what was out there. And I was very, very close with my parents. I was raised in quite honestly, just a really, really great home. But in my home, it was different than the home that was on the ranch. And so I think many people will probably understand what I'm talking about, that really my dad was kind of the hub that made the wheel turn on the ranch. And without him, like there was going to be like mass chaos, right? Like there was no one to actually lead the group of folks on the ranch. And that's I don't mean that as a derogatory statement or anything like that to the other family members, but there are those people in this world who are leaders, and then there are those people just who are not, who are much better at following directions and being followers, quite frankly. And so that's really how it worked in our operation. And one of the things that I noticed when I grew up was that there was really, I wouldn't say that we were necessarily poor because we weren't, but we just never really had a lot. My dad and mom made $600 a month, whether they needed it or not, at the ranch. And the ranch didn't really pay for any expenses. And so even their house, who the ranch owned, if they wanted to fix it up, they had to do it out of their $600 a month. And so it was kind of one of those things where we really didn't have enough land or enough cattle to raise only but one family. But there were 4 families that were living there. So everyone just split it up. So I think as a result of that, I really looked at our situation and I thought, how in the world am I going to come back to this place when these guys who, are here, my grandpa, my dad's 2 cousins, and my dad, aren't even making enough to make a living? They have nothing to share with me financially. But they also, as you might imagine, making $600 a month, that's not a great investment plan program. And so, there weren't a lot of savings. So there was really no plan for retirement either. And so my dad and I, we would get in these conversations. We would talk about, like, how are things going to work for the ranch, and who's going to take over, and what does this whole thing look like. There was only one other male cousin on my side of the family, and because we were I guess I don't want to say chauvinistic type family, but we were a very traditional family that the men had their roles and the women had their roles. And I don't happen to believe that way at all, of course. But my point is that if you were a female and you were raised on our ranch, you did not have an opportunity for ownership. Period. End of discussion. And so it really boiled down to myself or my other male cousin. Well, there were some issues there that I don't think that maybe he necessarily saw that as his future, and just spent a lot of time in and out of trouble. And so really that boiled down to me. And so I would come home and I would help my dad. I was actually working for the Wyoming FFA Foundation as their executive director. I would come home and help my dad. I would, help primarily with cattle, anything that needed to be done around the ranch on the weekends or anything like that, then I would come back for that. So one particular weekend, it was November 4th of 1999, I came home to help my dad wean calves. And so it was kind of your typical Western rancher setup, right? So my dad and I were up front, and we were moving the calves down, and we were doing all the vaccinating, we were doing all the ibexing, we were doing all the warbexing and all of that, ivermectin and whatnot. So my dad's two cousins, one was pushing him down through the tub, and then the other one, he was the shouter. So he would yell at us what his opinion was from a distance. And so that's just, quite frankly, that's how it worked. And so we had a calf that went over in the chute. And of course, he expressed some opinions with a few choice words about that. And the calf ended up passing away, or, died in the chute upside down, and we ended up dragging it out. And I remember putting my arm around my dad and saying, how come every time something goes wrong on the ranch, you're always the one that gets blamed for it? And he didn't say anything, and we got the calf pulled out. And shortly after that, we went up for lunch, and we came back down. We're doing the same thing again. I'm filling a vaccine gun, and I turn around, and my dad's gone. And I look in the alleyway, and he's laying on his back. And I jumped in the alleyway, I put my hand under his head, and I said, are you okay? And he opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, and his lips turned blue. And I shouted at his cousin, and we pulled him out, and I started CPR on my dad. And I just remember this moment, right? Like, I'm fifth generation on this ranch. Every male and female that ever lived on that place, like, lived for a long, long time. You have these plans and these aspirations that my dad and I had talked about. But I also had these expectations for myself of what was going to happen with this whole thing. And it just seemed like it was completely surreal that as I'm kneeling over my dad, giving him CPR, I just couldn't believe that it was actually happening. And it's kind of like in the movies where you think, well, you just do some work and then pretty soon the person's going to wake up. And the moral of the story is that the next day we pulled him off of life support because the doctor said that he was probably gone before he hit the ground. And he was 58 years old. I was 26 years old. My mom was 54. And so it really, that really, I had a life before that. But the life that I have had since that time is a life that I never, quite frankly, imagined that I would have. Certainly not bearing the circumstances that I found myself in. And so what happened is I was not quite newly engaged, had purchased my wife's wedding ring 4 days before my dad passed away, hadn't even asked her to marry me yet. And we got married about 8 months after that. And really, I think the challenge is that when my dad passed away, the hub fell off of the wheel. And so we had all of these family members that everyone wanted to be in charge now, but no one really knew how to be in charge. They didn't know how to run a business. They didn't know how to properly cash flow an operation. They didn't know anything about asset management. It was just, well, we're just going to show up and just do our job that Ed told us to do, and then we're going to go home. And that's the way it worked. And so I found myself in my dad's place, and it was not a healthy situation. I always explain to people that our family was one family tree, but two completely separate branches on that tree. And so my grandparents were still alive. And I honestly can say, I mean, I just really, truly believe that my grandparents died of a broken heart. I just think there's no other way to put it. It was their only son, and they were just broken. And the other side of the family didn't want anything to do with my grandparents. I'm newly married. I decided I would go back to college and finish my education, so I'm doing that. I am newly married. I'm driving 50 miles one way to go to the University of Wyoming. I'm driving 100 miles back the other way to work at the ranch and take care of my grandparents. I'm driving 50 miles back halfway to see my new wife, and then doing that every day of the week. And things just got too ugly. And I really found myself at this crossroads. Like, I'm, at the time, maybe 20, 27, 28 years old, really thinking to myself, what in the world am I going to do with my life? And this isn't a good long-term plan for me. I mean, I can't make, what I'm making here and actually raise a family and actually have a successful business, because there's too many people trying to make decisions that were not the right decisions that needed to be made. And so I kind of liken it to this. I always tell people that I committed the ultimate sin in family agriculture, and I broke up the family ranch. I mean, that was really what I was down to. And so I looked at all the options for over 2 years, and the options were just, it didn't matter which way I turned, none of them were going to be good. So if I stayed, because my dad passed away out of order for their estate plan, if I stayed, I could keep the shares from my dad and my grandfather. But if I left, I had to give a good portion of those shares away to the ranch. So I knew that if I left, I was going to end up with significantly less than if I stayed. And I ultimately decided to leave, because I just didn't feel that raising a family in that environment, which I would call a toxic environment, I did not think that was a great way to live. And I firmly believe this, that it's really hard to make these decisions. I mean, I'm 100 years deep into this thing at that time, but I also firmly believe that God has given us all talents and abilities, and He's given us an opportunity to make free choice. And He also gave me the incredible opportunity to live in the United States of America, where I am free to make choices and free to choose who I want to be. And ultimately, that's what I chose over the family ranch. I chose that over tradition. I chose that over perception of what I knew would be running rampant in our small community. I chose me. I chose us. I chose my kids. I chose my wife. That I honestly said to myself, I have zero idea what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to make this work. But what I do know is I'm not living that way. And so we found ourselves through this long process, of leaving the ranch and having to leave a lot of our assets behind. We found ourselves in this position where 4 years after being on our own, my accountant had a conversation with us, and he said, this isn't working very well. And I said, I'm completely aware that it's not working very well, because you can't take a percentage of something that doesn't work at 100% capacity and expect to take a percentage of that and have that work either. And so I decided um, to change gears once again. I think that in American agriculture production, I think we are bound by traditionalism. I think we are bound by this word that we call legacy. I think we are bound by this thing we call heritage, but we forget that we have our own God-given talents and abilities. We forget that we live in the freest country in the world, where we can choose to become whatever we want to become. And I broke that mold of traditionalism, and we ended up selling off almost everything that we had, and we started over. And we didn't know where we were going to go with that. But I just thought, for the first time, I think in 100 years, I'm going to look at this ag operation not as an heirloom, not as a legacy piece. I am going to look at it as a business. And that's how I've run my business ever since. And so we have gotten into the crop production arena, most specifically in the agriculture or the organic agriculture crop arena, and really had a section of farm ground to start with. We had an old 4440 1981 John Deere tractor with an old plow that I didn't even know how to use. And I remember going behind the farmstead in the field and putting it in the ground because I didn't even know which way to go around the field. And so I'm just playing with this equipment in the back off of the road so no one can see me what I'm doing, because I really don't know how any of this stuff works. And so we live in America, right? Figure it out. And so I got connected with really great people and built relationships with really great people. And we began to build our farm. And we began to step outside of the box and discover new and different things. And I can tell you that over the last 15 years or so since we've been building our farm, we have not made all the right decisions by any stretch of the imagination. But I am a firm believer that every decision that we've made, I think that the Lord has figured out a way to make it right. And so what I mean by that is that if we put our best effort forward, and if we are willing to take some risk, and we are willing to work hard, and we're willing to put our faith where our faith belongs, things are going to be okay. And sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And there's been a lot of nights that on this farm that I couldn't sleep, a lot of nights where I'm out working in my office or in the shop or something like that, in the middle of the night into the wee hours of the morning, just trying to figure out how to make things work and trying to make this machine run. And so we ended up down at my grandparents' place. They had lived there for 62 years, and nearly all of the buildings except one were falling apart. And that includes the house. And so we have gradually taken our proceeds that we've made from our enterprise, and we have put it into, we've torn a lot of buildings down, but we've repurposed all the buildings that we've saved. We built a nice home here. We have converted some buildings into useful facilities for our operation and for other operations that we run on the farm. We have invested, over time, of course, into a pretty modern fleet of equipment. We use technology in our business, and we have gone from that section of farm ground and that one John Deere tractor to building this farm over, we cover about 12,000 acres in total. Over 8,000 of that is in organic crop production. The remainder of it is, we did get back into the cattle business, and the remainder of that is land that we run our cattle on. And we have some really, really great partners that are in that. We have some great folks that work for us now. And that's kind of the essence of my story. I mean, I think that in the end, we're all responsible for our own choices. And one of the choices that I decided I would live with was that if I broke away from the ranch and I failed, I can live with that decision. But if I stay at the ranch and I get divorced, or my kids are dysfunctional, or there's constant strife and there's constant drama, and no matter what level of success that we might elevate ourselves to me, that was not going to be worth it. And so my wife and I own our farm collectively together now. It's actually a woman-owned business now. And we're very proud of that. And we're proud of the fact that we're able to raise 3 boys in peace and in harmony. We have raised these boys to find their own way, to make their own direction in life. That I don't have any expectations, spoken or unspoken, about my boys ever taking this place over. I don't think that it's my job as a parent to build a business so that my kids can inherit that business. I think it's my job to equip my children with the appropriate tools so that with or without this business, they can succeed. And that means the appropriate mental tools, the appropriate emotional tools, those types of things, where they're able to independently make good decisions for the right reasons. And so I'm not saying that one or all of them won't come back to the farm someday, but they're 12, almost 18, and almost 20 at this point. So they're young. And so we have always encouraged them to follow your passion, whatever that passion is. And each of them are completely different. And any parent will tell you that, it's pretty amazing how you can raise kids in what you think is the same house, and they're all completely different, but they all have different interests. They all have different desires. And we're really just trying to encourage them in that. And so, so that's the essence of it. We found ourselves just really having to make some hard decisions and really trying to make this thing work. We live in Wyoming, where we're at 5,300 feet elevation, which is a very difficult place to raise crops. It's all dry land. We have no irrigation. We get 14 to 16 inches of annual precipitation every year. For us, the organic business was a niche market. And in our area, where yields are not typically high, we had to find a niche market because we had to figure out a way to make this whole thing cash flow. And so I think that's something that we all have to look at independently and say, okay, what do we need to do to make our own businesses work, considering the environment that we find ourselves in and the financial position that we find ourselves in. So that's the who we are and where we came from.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for coming on.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Want more premium content? Subscribe to the Comstock Report, where you will receive 2 reports daily. Want more video content? We are on Facebook, YouTube, and now TikTok. So don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe.